What's going on, folks? Just like that. Here we go. Welcome to Jig Squad, Thursday night special, kicking off the year again, huh? So here we go, guys. Jig Squad. We are talking tonight on live about some pretty cool things. And there's some stuff that I haven't told you about that is going to be talked about in this show, but you don't want to miss it because it hasn't been talked about in depth like this on Jig Squad, which is some painting and power coating techniques that are going to be pretty cool and exciting to talk about. And but mostly this is about twitching jigs, tying with hair, movement, flow, and mostly a lot of steelhead, coho fishing, twitching jigs. But at the end of the day, here's the thing. These are all techniques that every smallmouth and largemouth guy should be looking at in terms of designing with hair jigs. And there's some very unique features of the hair jigs we're going to talk about tonight with Final Persuasion Angling, otherwise known as Chase Johnson. So you guys, if you're on Instagram, you could chase down on Instagram, and I'll put the links below to his social media. But let's get him in here as we get started and start talking jigs, because we don't talk about anything but jigs. Chase, what's going on, buddy? Welcome to Jig Squad. How are you?
Good. How's it going, Mike?
Good, buddy. So we always do a little roll call in the morning when we start the morning. I don't know. It is what it is. So who's in chat already? We got Hook Life, George, Dave, Tom Mix, Jay's Outdoorsy, Scott Vermonter, Gators. What's up, brother? Bass, Tim Maynard, Mike Bradley, Tom Mix. Did I say you right, Tommy? JP Harrell, and whoever else comes rolling in. So Kingfisher, welcome, buddy. So we're going to talk about some cool stuff tonight, specifically about these jigs. So if you need visuals, I want you guys to check out Final Persuasion Angling on Instagram. And so here's the Instagram handle at Final Persuasion Angling. So you can get some visuals, but Chase is going to show us some stuff tonight, but it's a little bit of what's underneath the hood tonight as well, because there's some real cool things that people don't get to see. And I think people are going to be excited about when we talk about jig design tonight, because Chase I'm sure he makes things with hooks, but he designs a lot of pretty cool things without hooks that look like jigs. And you guys got to hear more about it. So Chase, before we get into this, tell us a little bit about you, your background in fishing and tying, and tell us your story a little bit, bub.
Yeah. So I've been tying jigs for quite a while. I mean, obviously I'm not a very old person, but
young guys.
I've been still tying jigs for, I'd say, probably the better part of, I don't know, probably 12 years or so. And obviously it started with really simple marabou type jigs, and just kind of always having that drive to I think one of the things that we have in common is we're here to do this because we want to see fish caught on what we made. I think that's what makes a lot of us tick.
Absolutely.
At least me. And once I got started doing that, it just kind of it became this ever ongoing pursuit to want to keep doing that
and improving, right?
I don't fly fish personally.
Better. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't fly fish personally, but the amount of inspiration I've taken from the fly world is, insane. I mean, there's so much out there. There's too much divide, I think, in our sport between gear fishermen and fly fishermen, and I think that's so wrong. I really wish that there was more of a coming together, and I think jigs are kind of part of that.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where a lot of, in these later years of how I've actually taken a look at looking at designing jigs, it's kind of designing jigs with intent and with purpose, and to create shapes and flow. And that's some of what drew me to what you were doing, is I got to look at your page, and I really got to see, a group of guys, and trust me, there's a lot of guys in the fish community that have these things, and everyone's kind of stroking each other's ego about stuff. But I saw what you were doing, and it was just like this combination of the two worlds that I've always wanted to see. You know, it was an appreciation of both worlds, and it that really struck a chord with me. But yeah, I've been fishing for, you know, long time, and pretty much as soon as I could, my dad started taking me out, and it was always that kind of pursuit of wanting to catch a larger trout. You
Yeah,
know,
right.
a larger trout, until they came to the point where it was like, all right, well, we live in the Pacific Northwest, you know, salmon and
Right.
steelhead are a thing. That's kind of the bigger, thing. So,
That's what you're going for then, right?
yeah. And then, yeah, I'd say, gosh, I think I was probably, maybe 13, maybe 12 or something when I caught my first coho. And
Right.
the coho in particular, it it was that was really something. Maybe it was a little bit earlier than that, maybe 11. I don't know. It's, you know, but
Right.
it was coho that really got me, and I
Okay.
started to really just key into wanting to be a part of this. And the idea of steelhead around here, there's so much like mystique, you know, that comes
Right.
with them. This whole gray ghost thing. It's, you know, they're just a magical fish to a lot of folks around here, you know.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Chase, to me, you know, one, I really appreciate like how you described, you know, just your interpretation of Jig Squad and what this is supposed to be about. Because, like I said, and you and I have talked, right? So we know this already. But the thing is, like, we have to learn from other cultures. And so in fishing, what that means, like you guys. So to me, when I look at the Pacific Northwest, right, and steelheaders up your way, and coho, like I'm like, it's an amazing thing. And like I don't get to do that, right? Like, so we're fishing for steelhead in the creeks in Indiana. But it's not the same, not the same type of current, not the same type of environment you guys have up in the Pacific Northwest. And then we get the smallmouth guys on, and we get the East Coast guys, and then the southern largemouth guys, and then even the saltwater influence. And then you start talking to crappie guys, which just they I love the crappie guys because of the color, but you start putting all this together and you're like, how can I take those techniques from some of these other worlds? And is there something that becomes applicable to something I want to do or make? Right. And maybe 5 times out of 10, maybe 6, 7, 8 times out of 10, it's no. But what if it's 1 time out of 10? There's something I see that I like, or there's something that helps me process some type of material or what I'm getting out of the flow of a jig that we see from other people. That's why it's so amazing to me. So, like, describe for everyone the predominant. So, the predominant jig that most of the steelheaders, right, and or coho fishermen are using. I generally just call them twitching jigs, right? So, but there's a wide range of different
Mhm.
features of what would be considered twitching jigs within that range. How would you describe the jigs that you're making now? What would you describe them as?
Um, I mean, I put a lot of effort into doing both. You know,
Okay.
I personally, I use a lot of rabbit, I use a lot of marabou. Um, but the jigs that I do, for my twitching jigs have come quite a ways. And I'm a big advocate for using both. You know, I really like the marabou, and I really like I've really liked the twin tails. The twin tails has kind of become a thing. I didn't realize that there was more people using it than I realized.
Sure.
Especially in your guys' bass world, because the whole crawfish kind of claw thing. You
Yes.
know, I wasn't super in tune with that, because I've been pretty close minded to the whole bass world and everything. But
Right.
actually, because of you, I've started to look more into what some of you guys were doing, and I was like, oh gosh, there's smart people using twin tails for different things. But I
Yeah.
really like them in the style of twitch and jig that I make. Um, because, and I have GoPro footage with some of the jigs that I have, or at least I think most of the jigs that are on my page, that when you're watching them underwater, and it's not even just like, oh, the slow motion in the fish tank or in the bathtub video.
Right. Right.
I
Right.
mean, we got a GoPro set up, and I'm actively really twitching these things in. And you get to see the tails kick around, and they do all sorts of different things, and they come back together, and they flutter, and they fall, and they kind of do this sort of thing. And
Right.
they just, yeah.
So
I
for
really
everyone,
like that. I think a lot of the early footage that you're gonna see early, I guess. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, continue. Oh, you're there. We lost Chase. He went out. Chase will be back in. All right. So listen, Chase will hop back in. He's going to realize that he hit the wrong button, whatever he went to go hit. So as soon as Chase jumps back in, I will throw him back in. So here he is. There we go. Back in. And there he is. Just like that. You're back in, buddy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
There you go. So basically, you guys, so everyone in chat, right? Or if you're watching on replay later, understand that here's my interpretation of a twitching jig, right? So you're basically going to have, in most instances, it's going to be some type of tying method to include marabou, predominantly for the, the collar body. And then you're going to have a zonker strip, a rabbit on the back end. And I guess there's a lot of there's other materials that people would use, but a lot of times it's going to be the rabbit strips. And the thing is, you're going to get flow out of the marabou, and you also get a lot of flow out of the rabbit strips too, But the thing is, like Chase was just saying, he's using 2 on the back of his. But there's even more uniqueness. I don't even know how to lead into this. So what I want you guys to see is there's a couple things. One, Chase is going to show this tonight, but I also want you guys to go check out his Instagram page because he physically shows the pictures of close-ups as well. I'll zoom him in and make him big, but this is what I want you to see about what I'm talking about why this is unique of what he's doing and the why. There's a why. There's always a reason why. So Chase, show him what's underneath the hood of your style custom jig.
So I reached a point back in 2019 where I was just kind of frustrated dealing with the whole jig hook thing, and I was looking at a lot of the fly design that kind of happened late 80s, early 90s, at least in the steelhead world, with shanks. A lot of guys were cutting off hooks and wanting to bring that to, they wanted to tie bigger flies, but they didn't want as big of a hook on there. And I was like, it's about time that happens with jigs. So I created my own design for a shank body jig, and I wouldn't say that I'm the first one to come up with any kind of a concept of wanting to put a leader on the back of a jig. But I wanted to be the one that's what I do. Right. And so I had shanks, I designed shanks. My dad, brilliant dad, is he has an engineering background, and we sat down and we designed a shank, and has the articulation point on the rear end, so it has that rear eyelet, and has a wire leader on the back of it. And I got really tired mostly of the life of jigs relying entirely on the life of your hooks, and that was a huge thing for me. It's like a lot of people, friends would be asking me, why are you putting so much effort into the jigs that you tie if you're just going to lose them, this, that, and the other. And, or if you mess the hook up. And I was like, yeah, it really sucks when you roll a hook point and maybe you can't resharpen it very well, or it's just not worth your time. And it's like, that's a wasted jig. And I thought that was stupid. So I figured that it was about time that we started bringing in interchangeable hooks, at least to what I was doing for my full design. And there's other things to these jigs that I'm sure we'll get into, but I mean, it's not even just having the little articulated, eyelet in the back that you can do things with. I wanted people to be able to extend the life of their jig as much as they could possibly keep it out of the trees and out of logs and snags and stuff underwater. If you have the right line line combo, for your leader.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can bend hooks out, and if that hook's messed up, you can take that thing off the leader and take that off. And then that's the other beauty, is if you can do that enough, which I'm sure there's somebody that can somehow get it back every time. But if they can do it, then just cut off the leader, and then you can put like a Siwash and connect a Siwash to that, or do a Siwash split ring, swivel combo, just like you would on the back of a spinner or some type of plug or something. Like,
Yeah.
I want people to be able to use these as long as they possibly can. I wanted to try to make as durable as something and unique to me, because I know there's other options out there. I've seen guys that tie jig, at least around here. There's definitely guys that tie jigs with leaders on the back, and most of them are cutting hooks off and they're doing things like that. And I just wanted to design a shank and just put a leader on the back and give people that option of choice.
There's a lot of value to I'm going to use the word swinging, right? A swinging hook point.
Yeah.
And for tons of different reasons, especially for big fish. I'm just gonna, I'll be honest. Like, a lot of fish get leverage, right? And we all know that. And that's, you'll hear the guys on the East Coast, the striper fishermen, or I guess even the West Coast striper fishermen, and then a lot of the steelhead fishermen. Leverage is a big deal, like for us, even in the creeks, right, in smaller areas, man, you don't want that hook, you don't want that fish to have any leverage, right, at all. And I know it sounds crazy, but when you're talking about a larger size fish, and leverage becomes a bigger deal, right? And so that's why the concept is so great. In addition to the things you said about being able to change out hooks depending on what you feel you need at that point in time. And so the cool thing is that these are things that you're not really running a leader, not a leader. You're not running trailers on, because you have the rabbit or the zonker strips are on these jigs, guys. So conceptually, I will tell you this straight up, I don't think there's a smallmouth guy in the house or that would watch on replay that wouldn't see a jig like that as being valuable, right? And man, I'm telling you, like, there's so many cool things that people could take from some style design, even if it's not the same exact design as yours. If it's just twitching jigs, including rabbit strips or zonker strips, it's just, you want to talk about flow and action in the water. I really love the concept of swing hooks, right? Whether that be a Siwash on the back, whether it be how you have it tied. Now, talk to me about the not the articulated piece, because I know you said that you had that made or making it. And then what type of, how thick is that wire that you're using? I mean, what's the range of what that you have on there? I mean, it's probably one standard.
This I ended up going with 40 thousandths for the wire, and it's nice to tie on. I think that was my biggest thing. That's what a fly shop owner friend of mine he suggested, just because that's how he gets his shanks made. A lot of this all came from a good friend of mine that he has his shanks made, through one of one of the big tackle manufacturers that we all know.
Right.
And he was just like, I just need a spinner shaft. Like, just give me a spinner shaft and I'll make them into fly shanks. And when we were talking about it, he's like, I'm sure they could probably do something pretty similar for you. So his shanks, the rear end of my shanks look identical to what, his just simple shanks are essentially. So this is just 40 thousandths spinner wire, and they're nice, when you're tying with them, they're not flexing all around on you. They're nice and strong. And he stands by it, and he's long time commercial fly tire, from everything, to Alaska, all over the US. I mean, his stuff's gone a lot of places, and with those shanks. And so that was the easy choice for me to be able to be like, all right, well, I guess we'll go with that.
Super cool. All right, now talk to me about hold on. Here's Brian Schmidt. What's Brian say? Is it mono or nylon coated 7-strand for the loop? I think it's nylon, right?
It's nylon. It's the it's wire. it's, it's got the it's the American Fishing Wire. Forget what particular one, I'm blanking on it right now, but I like to use the 27 pound because it just gets
Yep.
through hook eyes, some of the smaller hook eyes the guys might want to put on them, and it just works good, stiff. It doesn't kink too bad when it does kink. Yeah, Surflon, yeah.
Interesting. Talk to me about the head. All right, so 90 degree, right? 90 degree ball style.
Yeah.
Do you have are there thoughts in your head about the 90 degree head, or that's just what you use?
That's just what I use. I haven't really kind of had any. I've thought about wanting to go to some other angles for the steelhead jigs based off of. There's like a lot of theories on how guys might float a steelhead jig under a bobber, which would be different than this style of jig design. The steelhead jigs vary quite a bit. They can be anywhere from something fluffy, marabou, schlappen, things like that. And they can just be straight rabbit jigs as well. And I've thought about some of the different angled eyes, especially with how that kind of line comes down and the scope that it makes coming off of the, like an inline weight down from a bobber. That's kind of the extent of what I've looked at for different eyes. But really, I mean, I want vertical up and down twitching. I don't want this. Right. I want this. So that's where the 90-degree bend has kind of been the only reason why I've wanted to do that. And that's why I go with ball heads personally. There's nothing wrong with darter heads. There's a lot of guys, especially around here, there's a lot of guys that have those darter pointy looking heads. And they like twitching with those because it adds different, action. While they're twitching them in, they'll kind of dart off to one side and they'll do something. Right. But if I'm in heavy cover, personally, I want that to be going up and down. I don't want to be twitching next to a log and then it dart off and I'm like, I want it to be predictable, but that's just me.
Yeah, and it's funny, Chase, because even if this is interpretive for me, not that I know this, but as I even look at a lot of the twitching jigs from the north, I'll just say Northwest, right? Or twitching jigs in general. Most people are using that 90-degree head style. And funny enough, I'm a huge fan of a 90-degree ball head jig for a lot of applications that other people don't always use. And so, and there's different theories on some of these different things, but I mean, it's a great comment. I mean, it's a twitching jig, right? So you predominantly have to consider what is the effect of what you're generally trying to do. You're not, it's all about line angle and what's the drop of the line. And so I love the tail end, right? So what are the walleye guys call them? Death jigs, or 20 gazillion other names of what they do. I know On the Fly Tackle mentioned that he uses some of these for, I think, some walleye stuff as well. So it's really cool. And I had to ask about the head style. All right. So listen, now, and we could go back and talk about this, but I'm so excited to talk about this other part because I didn't think everyone was I didn't even realize we were going to go into this until we started talking. Yeah. On the fly, musky. That's another example why you'd want a hook like this, right? All right. So, guys, everyone in chat, if you're watching on replay, one of the other things we're going to talk about tonight is there's lots of opinions on this, but we're going to talk about it because this is Jig Squad and there's no better place to have this conversation, right? So we're going to talk about painting styles with powder coating. Okay. And the reason we're going to talk about this tonight is because Chase has a background and has some interesting information that I think that a lot of custom jig makers may not know and may not consider or may not value, but I think it's important for people to hear this. And it's basically the way he does things and his experience with powder coating and being in that industry. So I don't even know how to start it off, Chase, but talk to us a little bit about your background around powder coating, and then how that additionally became part of your fishing experience and jig design experience.
Right.
Was that a good intro?
Yeah. No, I think you did a good job at it. So in just we're always trying to improve things, right? It's always this constant pursuit of like, how can I make this better? How can I make this more durable? Yada yada. So,
Durability, yes.
I worked at a facility where we did in-house powder coating, and we were a part manufacturer, and we made a bunch of parts to put together for other different purposes. I won't say which outfit, but we had a very large powder coating outfit, and I was kind of at that teetering point of, like, I'm sure a lot of people were, at least guys around here in the Northwest, where there's kind of two camps of people when it comes to what you're coating your heads in. You're either doing powder and you're accepting that you may or may not deal with chipping, or if you deal with chipping and flaking, like, you're not going to care about it too much. You just know that's what comes with the territory, but it's easy to do. Or there's the guys that have completely signed it off and they go vinyl only.
Yeah.
And that's their whole thing is vinyl. And that's like, to my understanding, that's like a 3-coat system. There's a primer base coat of some kind. There's the color coat, depending on which effect you're looking for. And then there's a clear coat to go over it so it doesn't turn out matte finish, makes it nice gloss looking. And it can be temperamental. It's fumey. It's not great, like, you really should be wearing a respirator and have lots of ventilation when you're doing it. I know some guys don't do that, but you really should be doing that. And I was like, I work in a facility where we do in-house powder coating. Like, I want to talk to these guys and see if they, what their opinion is on paint and how this all works. And so I went up to them one day and I was just kind of picking their brains about, like, so how durable is this stuff really? And they were kind of like looking at me all confused. They're like, this is the most durable paint that exists. Like powder is the most durable paint that exists. And I was like, well, really? Well, I deal with chipping sometimes, and there's a lot of guys that complain about it and stuff like
20
that.
minutes in the toaster, brother.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
The way a majority, including myself, in the industry paints, right?
Yeah.
So let's be fair. This is not me being different than anyone else. This is the easy way that everyone got in on the hobbyist end of some bare basics of how you powder paint, right? We powder paint. We dip. Some people use fluid beds. You put it in the toaster oven,
Bing, bang, boom,
but
done.
go ahead. Continue.
Yeah. This guy looked at me and he's like, is it durable? And he took a wrench and slammed it against, like, a repaint part, like one that was already going to be stripped and redone. And he just smacked it against it. And he's like, see that? And he took his thumb and was, scraping at it. He's like, that looked like it's chipping. I'm like, well, I guess not. And then he started to press me. He's like, so what are you doing? He's like, what are you doing for prep work? And I just kind of looked at him blankly and was like, well, I heat them up and then I dip them in the powder and then I stick them in and he's like, no. Like, what are you doing before all that? And I was like, well, I heat them up. He's like, no, prep work. Like, there's prep work that's involved. And he's like, look at this giant facility that we have. He's like,
right
over there's a sandblaster. All those parts are going through the sandblaster first, and they're getting scuffed up and roughed up. They're going from the sandblaster and they're going into some type of acid wash. They're getting degreased, they're getting cleaned, and then from that point, they're going into the first stage of the oven, and they are outgassing, and anything that might be on them is getting cooked off. And then once they cool down, they get into the paint room, and then there's guys that are actually shooting with guns, and they are shooting parts, and they even have some robot painters that are going up and down automated, and they're shooting powder and all that. And he's like, and then once that's all done and it looks good and they pass the visual inspection, he's like, then they go into the oven and then they cure. And he's like, and always remember, and this is the biggest thing that dawned on me, because I didn't realize this, is he goes, always remember, your cure time is based off of when the part hits that temperature. And I was really confused by that. He's like, so like, what's the cure time with your guys' hobby paint, you know, stuff that we've all been using from ProTech, you know, examples, you know, and light companies. And I'm like, well, typically it's like 350 for 20 minutes. He's just like, right. So he's like, so you're in there with like a instant read thermometer and you're hitting it with the laser.
Then you put it in and you're like, no, that's
like,
not what most people do.
No, it's like that thing's preheated to 350. I put the stuff in, and then 20 minutes goes by, and he was just like, huh, well, there's your problem. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? He's like, powder and all the manufacturers will tell you this. And oftentimes a lot of these auto grade powders that are being done, any of the parts on the label are going to tell you that the part cures when it hits that temperature.
Right.
And this light bulb moment kind of went off for me. I'm like, oh my God, we've been under curing our stuff for I don't know how long.
Right.
But that I also had another friend of mine that I was kind of telling this to, and he's like, you know, I kind of had a hunch on that. He said, because I think he stuck some in a toaster oven, and you know, they're already gelled out, so they already look like they're cured.
Right.
And he had forgotten if he had actually like cured them or not, because he was cured them or not, or because he was busy. And he was like, oh, and then just ended up curing them twice. And then kind of started to really think about it. I was like, no, these got cured twice. And was like, well, I wonder how the finish turned out. And he was like, wow, these are really durable. And he's like, I wonder if there's something to double baking them. And in reality of it, you know, the biggest takeaway from it is I just don't think a lot of guys are fully curing their stuff. And so I started to do some experimenting, and this is actually an experiment I did. This is with Protex, one of the transparent dark blues that they do. But this is after the driveway test. I don't know if everyone can see that, but really, that's pretty good. That's after beating that thing with a hammer, taking a pair of pliers to it, whacking it. The only shiny kind of bits of lead that you're seeing through that is where actually something penetrated through the paint enough to actually poke into lead. None of this is actually chipping or flaking off. So that is with ProTech. You know, that's with what a lot of people are using, and that's pretty good, you know, from what people are used to.
You know, what's funny, Chase, I keep thinking this. This is why I told my kids, and I'm going to tell this because I think this applies here. When you're going to cook the pizza in the oven, you preheat the oven, then you put the pizza in. You don't throw the darn pizza in the oven and then wait till it gets to 425 and count those first 2 plus 3 minutes. It doesn't work that way. And I'm thinking of pizza here all of a sudden. So now you've trained my brain to relate powder coating of jigs to making pizza in the oven. So I think I'm going to forever use that because of you. All right.
It's a little different each time too. I mean, that's the crazy thing.
Yeah. And you know, here's the other thing. I also think that, and I could be wrong in this. I know that there's different values to pigments, right? Or powder, right? And what I mean by that, it could be crazy. It could be you're buying if you're buying t-shirts, right? Like there's different ways that those t-shirts feel with different pigment colors. And the same thing applies to powder paint. And everyone knows that if you don't know, this is you're learning now, is that when you're using powder paint, you're going to have different tendencies of different colors, right? Based on the pigments and what they use to make those pigment colors, which is crazy. And so, but you start to learn that after you play around with it. But it's so interesting about the paint stuff. Talk about, are you saying anything about what you fell into?
I mean,
about your system, about what you found afterward. So, okay. How about this? Talk about, what would be some of your recommendations for the layman sitting at home, right? Or the average hobbyist, that is hearing these things. What are a few things that they could do to increase the durability of their powder painting process, regardless of what they're using, regardless of what powder paint brand or automotive? I have plenty of friends that go, like I have a lot of ProTech, right? Why? Because ProTech's available to me.
Right.
I've used a lot of different powders over time. I have friends that use a lot of the automotive stuff because they have automotive places by their house, right? And that's been their experiences. But what can the average jig maker do to increase the durability of some of their powder paint jigs besides temp?
Besides temperature, I
Because like
mean,
I'm not going in and I'm not sandblasting my thing, but should I be going in to rough up my jig
I mean, I don't.
or take to get the acid off?
I think it's. I've noticed this in looking at, and not to say it doesn't happen to me too, because I'm crazy extensive with it, because it's one of those, like, once you learn it, you can't unthink about doing it if you don't do the full process. Um, you notice pitting that'll come out, if if the surface of your lead isn't clean enough, right? So I,
Okay.
gosh, I think, I mean, you don't have to go through and sand each one, but I mean, I would at least make them rough, because you got to figure that this is paint that isn't really sticking to a whole lot, right? Any paint of any kind, for that matter, has to kind of, something has to be a lightly rough surface, and it has to be a clean surface for it to actually grip onto it. So when your powder actually heats up, it will gel into that lightly rough surface, so it has actually something to grip into. So I mean,
Great comment by Brian
yeah.
Schmidt here. Like everything, do it right. Shortcuts suck for the customer.
No, that's a huge thing, Brian. Like,
That's a great comment, bud.
that's well, yeah, once you know how to do it right, and just go watch powder coating videos. I mean, all those guys doing wheels, any of that. I mean, you'll soon be like, all right, well, how can I simplify this down? I think a prep surface is a good surface, personally, and you don't have to go super crazy with it, but I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, besides at least making sure your stuff's fully cured. I am in there, and like you're saying, Mike,
Yeah,
everything is different, especially depends on how much you load your oven, right? Because it takes longer to heat all that stuff up. And then sometimes, with all that lead in there, it's all radiating off of itself. And sometimes you go a little bit cooler because of what the heat that it's radiating and creating. And I'm in there with
interesting
an
point.
instant read thermometer, and I'm hitting the heads in the back, and I'm hitting them in the front. I'm trying not to do it too close, because it's definitely cooler up front. I try not to fully load it, especially depending on
It's
the
a good
size of your
comment.
oven. And I'm hitting, kind of doing random checks throughout the oven. And you'll learn other things, the more research you dive into with powder coating, because you can get false readings. Actually, your laser will hit any of your super heavy metallics or super shiny glosses. You'll
Yeah,
hit a metallic or something, and it will give you a false reading, because the laser's having a tough time actually hitting it and reading it, because of its reflectiveness. I forget the actual term
I
that's created
understand.
by that false reading, but that's like a thing, and so it might even help if you just stuck a bare jig head in there and have
Yep.
that be maybe in the middle, so that you could hit that one and kind of try to get a rough reading on everything, if you don't want to, like, be super diligent about hitting each one, and trying to
Interesting.
get the actual reading on it. But I don't that my time does not start until those parts hit, and those jig heads hit that temperature. If your cure time, a lot of my I strayed away from ProTech personally,
Mhm.
because I just felt like there was more options out there, and I think a lot of us have, and you could buy in bulk, and matters of pounds of powder, and not think about cups and things like that. Um, I just I got into that because I really liked how they really broke down the paint nerd aspect of showing all the specs of this. I'm using powder that actually shows impact testing on it, and it shows the
Like a
impact
data sheet you're
resistance.
talking about,
Yeah,
Chase? Like that? Yeah.
yeah. I haven't looked into see what ProTech does, but I just know, based off of the cup, the little cups that we've all used, it
Yeah.
wasn't enough information for me to be satisfied. And there's
I
nothing wrong
understand.
with using it. I think they've got. I mean, that's a pretty good test. That's ProTech paint, right? But
Yeah.
I really found it valuable to know what I was getting into by looking at a data sheet um,
I
from a
understand.
company that shows impact resistance, and they
Interesting.
they
Yeah.
they will paint a panel they'll shoot apart, you know, a pan of these little thin panels of aluminum usually, and most times they're unprepped.
Right,
They're not
right.
going through and actually like roughing these things up, but they have this little sliding rail system where they bring this weight up and they drop it, and each one of those ratings equates up to X amount of pounds per square inch, and they give it a rating on where that paint wants to actually break and flake and chip and how
Okay.
its flexibility of it. And a lot of the paint that I'm using, I try to shoot for anything at least over 80 pounds per square inch of direct and indirect impact resistance.
You're an
I'm crazy
you're,
like that.
you're an absolute powder paint geek.
Yeah.
I love
And
it, dude. But here's the thing. It's so interesting to hear that because
mhm,
like I told you before when we talked, I'm like, I don't know all that, and so eh, the information you're talking about makes me more informed, right?
mhm,
And and I think that like I value that. I value hearing these things. And to be honest with you, and I even said this before, Chase, like, what do I paint with? I paint with Protect, right?
yeah,
Why? Because I like it. It does what I need it to do. I've had good experience with it. It's easy to use. I don't buy in bulk. Um, just because I'm not making in bulk, to be honest with you. But it is interesting to hear those things. And I can completely see why somebody would say, if I want all these other data points and stuff or understanding and you're really into it, you want these other parts, meaning information, right?
yeah,
And it's so interesting to me. But what I will say, I also think that the things you were talking about is just that uh, there's some basic things that we could do as just everyday designers to make our stuff a little bit better, right?
mhm,
Um, and let's be honest. I mean, guys, just because I tell everyone all the time, I'm like, everyone knows that I'm an ambassador with Dual Molds, and I've been using Protect for a long time. But that doesn't mean that there's not other stuff out there. It's good to learn about these things because it makes us better informed. If anything, minimally, it teaches you that there's going to be different experiences of baking and powder coating you're going to have with different colors. Just consider the things we're talking about tonight about how you go about it. So whether you're using ProTech or another brand, I don't care. I have a good, my life is simple and I do pretty good with ProTech. But when I talk to Chase, I like hearing all these things because like there's a lot of cool information that he's sharing. And the value base of this is that I want people to be able to open their eyes to the world of there's other ways to do things than what we've always been told. And if you're not a jig maker and you're watching this show, you can be better informed about the products you buy, right? And there's nothing wrong. We've moved into this age, Chase, and I think you're probably I don't know who would disagree with this, but if you do, tell me what you think about this. But we've moved into this age in our world where I think that we're exposed to so much more about product. And what I mean by that is that the digital media world has allowed us to ask more questions, become better informed, and to put us in a situation to, just become better informed for those that want to be. So minimally ask the companies you buy from. If they tell you, if they tell you that they've got the best powder coated jigs on the market, just ask them. You don't even have to get technical. Just ask them, well, why is that? How
yeah,
how is that? What do you do? And just listen to what they say. And then
mhm,
come back and listen to what Chase just talked to us about some of these things that might make. I will tell you this. The heating thing is something that I do. I wait till it gets to temperature because I told you about the pizzas. I can't have pizzas sitting there for 2 to 3 minutes warming up to 425 in the oven. But some of these other techniques, now I'm going to play around with scuffing up the jigs. I'm going to play around with cleaning and taking the oils off. Why? Because I just want to try. I think
yeah,
it's cool and I think it allows you to be informed. Yeah, like Alf said, Paladin, he says, agreed on being better informed. If anything, it gives you options that you didn't even know you had, right?
mhm,
Will, I appreciate it, dude. I mean, here's the thing. If all well, first of all, everyone knows all we talk about in Jig Squad is jigs, sometimes plastics and some
mhm,
trailers and stuff. But the thing is, guys, listen, we're only as good as the information we're willing to receive from others. you know, I think I'm right about a lot of stuff, but I also know that I should open my ears sometimes and listen to other people. And that's, you know, it's like it's a good experience. It helps expose us to other design elements, other ways of doing things, and understanding what might fit into what we're going to do. Am I going to do everything that Chase does to paint a jig? Probably not. But I will tell you this, I will play around with it for a while. There's some different things that I already do. But take that for what it's worth. Decide what's that what it's worth to you. Is it worth your time? Everyone, Chase, have you ever seen Larry Hadley's stuff, The Angler?
I'm not sure.
He
I
gets a
mean,
lot of the swirl effects from the powder paints and stuff like that, and the jig heads.
Yeah.
Larry has mastered this process of doing that technique. And he's just a great designer, right? And he was on the show, and for a long time, Larry wouldn't come on the show. And the reason why was he goes, I'm worried that, you know, like I don't want to give away everything I do, right?
Yeah.
Which just like you or anyone else. And then Larry finally realized, he tells me the story. He goes, I remember talking to my wife and saying, you know, I don't know if everyone's going to go and do and spend the time doing what I do. And I'll leave it at that. But it's one of those things. Like I'm saying it straight out. Like, I'm not going to do everything Chase does. I'm just telling you why. I'm also not selling. So, you know, that's a big thing too. Like Brian Schmidt. Schmidt manufactures jigs. He makes jigs. He was the guy that made the comment in chat earlier. He's like, yeah, you know, you got to do things this way for the customer. Another guy that takes a lot of time on his painting is On the Fly Tackle, you know, or any of the other guys in here. You know, maybe those are two that I know for sure. I can't speak for everyone, but let's see. Here's one question. George Val says, how do you heat your jigs before painting?
I don't. That's the thing. Because I'm going through the process of I rough them up, and after they're roughed up, how I get them to that point is how I choose to do it. And
right.
I once they're roughed up and once they're cleaned, and I let them bake. I don't shoot them, you know, because I actually shoot with a gun. I'm not dipping with a you know, a fluidized bed. You know, I'm not doing that. I've done that in the past when I was using Protect stuff. Currently I'm using you know, paint from larger manufacturers and things like that, that do auto grade stuff. And a lot of that powder really shouldn't be put in a fluid bed, or at least some of the stuff that I'm using, it really needs to be charged with electricity and needs to atomize right, going through mixing with air, and it doesn't mix right, some of the types of finishes that they have out there. So I'm not heating it up beforehand. I'm shooting them when they're cold, or at least not hot, just so that I can manage it, because I have a little electrode that I hook up to. I like to use those clamping racks that I know you've used them, Mike. The little clamping racks. They've got like high heat silicone on one side of them, you know, inside the little clamping racks. I like those because I can hook up an electrode to that thing and charge that, and then my I can dial in the suggested settings, the kV settings, and the kilovolts, and the microamps, you know, that are recommended by the manufacturer for the powder that I'm using, and I can shoot that. And I'm coating those on one of those clamping racks, and I was taught in the paint room by those guys at my old job. I was like, well, how much is too much, and what, you know, blah blah blah. How do you know when you've done enough, you know? And their whole thing was they like to shoot until there's enough powder on there where it looks hairy, and that concept of it looking hairy is when there's enough powder on there. When you kind of look at it really closely, it almost looks like some of the powder standing on end, because the part can't, because of the charge being applied to that part, it can't really feasibly hold any more powder, and it's all just kind of clinging on there, standing on end. And then once it's on there, the charge holds plenty long enough for you to take the electrode out, and then you stick it in the oven and put it in the oven, and you'll watch them gel out. You know, it'll be fluffy powder stuck to that jig head. You know,
but it's the temp. It's the temp. It's
the
already temp, when you put it in.
The oven is up to temp. I'm sticking those inside the oven, and I'm waiting.
Right.
And I'll give it sometimes like 10 minutes, depending on the size of the heads, because I'm using thicker heads. A lot of it, well, at least for twitch and jigs, you're using like 3/8 to half ounce, and some guys are using larger. But and I'm hitting each one of those heads, waiting for it to come up to 400 degrees, whatever the manufacturer recommends. And as soon as each, the rows of jig heads within reason, within at least under 20 degrees, usually,
Okay.
like past that point. So like if it cures for 400 degrees and it's reading 415, depending on the paint itself, like you were saying, how different paints
Color.
react differently, and
Yeah.
the colors, especially fluorescents, those can darken if you let them get too hot. You don't want to go too hot with those. You want to keep that temperature range shorter, at least from what I've noticed. And I'm waiting for each one of those. I'm kind of spot checking each one of those heads and looking to see when they get up to that temperature. And when it hits that temperature, then you hit start on your time, and then you take them out. And even within the cure time, I've got I don't just set it to 400, and then hope for the best. I even have a secondary thermometer in there to
Yeah.
watch it actually go up, to see where I'm fluctuating
Sure.
between. And I'm hitting those parts and making, even within the cure time, I'll check them halfway through and hit them and be like, all right, cool, we're still within 15 or so degrees. I don't go under. Always want to be over, at least from what I've always done. Yeah.
So it's so interesting, right? Because that the technical end of that of getting those things, those exact temps. So listen, crappie jig. I just highlighted your post. Listen, here's what I'm going to tell you, bud. So there's two worlds that are supposed to come together in the jig making community. One is the technical end of exactness, right? And then there's also the end of, getting started and keep it simple. So earlier on in chat, Jay's Outdoorsy, who um eh, eh, when Jay's on in another month or two, we're going to hear about some interesting painting as well. But what I'll tell you is this, buddy, don't be afraid. You only learn by experimenting. And what I'll tell you is when you heat your jigs, um, I do a process that's different than the standard guys. They like to heat their jig and then throw it in the oven. I put it back over. I learned from a guy that just passed away literally a couple months back, 80 some years old. He taught me 20 close to 30 years ago. And we were always on that heat gun. That just it was what it was. And we learned how to do a lot of different things on it, right? And I'll just kind of leave it at that. But it's there's a lot of easy starting with it, right? You always less is more when you're getting started. Heat it, you're going to dip it, and you definitely don't want to put it in your wife, your girlfriend's, or your own
Nope.
kitchen oven. You want to
Nope.
buy a small little toaster off of a resale or Facebook Marketplace, or get one on sale at Target or something like that. But it's simple to get started. And crappie jig, if you're on Instagram, buddy, if you send me a message, I'll kind of connect with you a little bit and give you some tips on just getting started with some simple processes. But don't be intimidated, right? No one started off super technical, right? And just remember that. And there's a lot of good people in the jig making world that'll help you out. But if you contact me on Jig Squad on Instagram, or email me at jigsquadfishing@gmail.com, I will connect with you. I'll even call you and we'll talk, and I'll kind of help you out and get started. Okay. You're not going to burn the house down. And if you do, don't tell them you talked to me. It's going to be as simple as that. I mean, I'm not really sure how else to put that. John is saying he used the standard heat gun, laser thermometer. John, using the laser thermometer already puts you past 3/4 of the jig makers out there, to be honest with you. And always oven cure. The thicker the paint, the stronger it seems.
I got a
And
note on that.
yeah, go ahead, comment.
So the thicker the paint thing, and there's a lot of guys that'll go 2 coats, even 3 coats, like heating it up. Cause I used to do that. I used to heat them up and
I
dip
don't
them.
like
And
multi coats.
yeah, I kind of asked about that with the guys on the paint line, and they were saying that um, the most even single coat you can do is going to be the most flexible, at least durable coat that finish that you're going to get as an end result. I understand the idea. I used to double coat, a long time ago, and before too long, then you'd start to get paint sag, and then at least if you're hanging them upside down and not using the clamping racks, and you get the little dreaded paint nipple on the top
right.
of the heads because they're hanging, and then you're like, I put too much paint on this one. But the
Yeah.
most consistent, even single coat that you can get. And trust me, there's multi-coat powders. I get that. You do a base coat of white to make your candy clear pink, make it hot pink. I get that. But it's trying to make it a nice even coat and not making it too thick.
Right.
That's actually what you're wanting to shoot for, at least in that
And
powder coating world.
I kind of in align with that too. Yeah, John saying, I think Relapse Tackle likes a very thick coat and actually dips it into water to solidify the paint afterward and stop that temperature from heating. Some guys do a lot of different things. I don't do that. It's gonna be interesting because Relapse is coming on. So Relapse does a lot of really cool little hacks in his workshop. That I can't wait for him to talk about things on his bench and magnets and stuff that he does, and a lot of cool little things. But it's interesting. And so like tonight, the stuff you guys hear, or if you're listening on replay, you got to take what you're going to use, right? The information's only valuable to you to the extent that you're going to use it, right? And so if there's parts that you're not going to use, then oh well, that's fine, no big deal. But and that's okay, right? John made a good point. There's lots of different styles out there and a lot of different things that people are doing. And here's the other thing: the Stardust paint that Relapse is using is a different animal all in itself. And he goes out of his way to even tell you can't use this in a fluid bed. Or maybe he doesn't say that, but a lot of people do. And you shouldn't. So it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. He loves it, right? For a lot of different reasons. And so he'll have a chance to talk about that in time too. Chase is talking about a lot of different automotive ends and things. The one thing I want you guys to hear too is consider when you listen to some of the things that Chase has talked about, I want you to remember this, right? A lot of these companies, whether it be an automotive company or a powder coating place, a lot of times powder coating companies, regardless of what they'll make product for or do or paint for, they paint in the big metal industry. They paint a lot in the automotive industry uses powder coats. I had said to Chase before we came out, I go, listen, no one's painting wheels and rims on a car and having it and talking about, yeah, well, after a few rocks chip up on the road, your wheels are going to look like garbage, like we talk about knocking rocks in the river, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to understand that there is a more elaborate process that the industry of powder coating uses. It's a lot different than us dipping in a can, right? And so knowing what some of that is and hearing some of the things that Chase talked about is good to know about, all right, so Smallmouth Junkie says, fair question, Chase, do you use primers prior to applying paint?
Yeah, there's certain paints that are kind of your designated primers. And then, I mean, you talk to any of the guys, any of the paint techs of whatever company that you're dealing with, I mean, there's a lot of great companies out there, but there's some that are kind of your designated primers that they would be like, these are primers. And then there's some that it's like, you can just use them as primers. And, if I was just using, let's just say like gloss black, I'm not putting a primer on beforehand. I'm just making sure I have a nice prepped surface before I do it. And I'm not even putting any kind of clear coat over it either. Like the gloss black, I mean, this one happens to be, but this is a head that I also put through the driveway test. You can see it's pretty banged up. Pretty banged up, but that happens to be a gloss black that happens to have a blue flake clear over it. But I know that black is just as durable without, without, I mean, you see how the edges are flattened and stuff, but
that's cool.
That's just by itself. Prep surface, straight gloss black, and then this particular one happens to have the clear with the blue flake over the top of it. But I don't worry about it too much. other than if I'm going with certain color, like if I want to make like a candy clear pop, because there's some really cool metallics out there, some chrome bases that you can get into. And as we kind of talked about a second ago, the different textures, one of the things the other guy, the powder paint, the paint line guys were telling me, is you can't expect a ton of flexibility out of fluorescent colors. There's something about whatever that makeup is of those. You can't expect a ton of flexibility from them. It's just how they are. They're a little bit more brittle. And that's why some of them might score lower in that kind of impact testing. And same thing with metallics, because they have so much metallic stuff in them. I don't know what they're made out of, but they've got a lot of stuff in them that makes them more brittle. And I'll order those panels, those color swatches from some of the companies, and it'll say what it says about its impact rating, and I'll just take those and I'll bend them and I'll crumple them up in my hand if they're light enough to do that too, and I'll just manipulate them and just see how the paint reacts. I mean, because a polyester is going to be a little bit different than a polyurethane, and then even a polyester TGIC, that's another thing you might see in some of these paint specs, is like even a little bit different than that. They all kind of react a little bit different,
right?
And so you just have to know you might have unrealistic expectations for what you want your paint to do sometimes, but you can always start out on the right step by making sure it's fully cured right, not cured too hot, and making sure your surface is prepped. I mean, I will preach that enough, and I don't think I'm giving away anything by saying that personally.
No, because I think
it's just a standard practice with any kind of powder coating of parts.
So guys, this is what I'm going to say, and I might not even have this right because I don't even follow these steps, but generally I'll say, right, roughed up surface. What are the things you heard tonight? Roughed up surface. Everyone's got to figure some things out on their own, right? Roughed up surface.
Pick your battles for sure.
Degreaser, getting the grease off, or cleaning, just cleaning. So, and if you look up anything about cleaning metals for paint, you should get a lot of your answers, right? Mm-hmm. And so you should do that. Why? Because you look it up and become more informed. I'm going to, when Chase told me about some things, that's what I did. I was slapping the keyboard. And because Chase is a business too, like Final Persuasion Angling, he sells jigs. He's not supposed to tell us everything, right? That's just how it goes. All right. So I'm going to talk about that in 1 second, but I want to talk about finding jigs from Final Persuasion Angling. But I gotta address the clown card that jumped in, and I highlighted his chat. So this is Mr. Tesh, my buddy up in Wisco, and he says, "Don't take Kuda's advice on buying a cheap toaster oven. Trust me on this one." So even though I'm knocking him, he is. I'm going to agree and I'm going to disagree with him. I'm going to disagree because I didn't spend a lot of money on a toaster oven, but what I did do is I learned and I checked my temperature on my oven to find out what the range of it is. And it's not accurate. It's off in terms of the temp it outputs. So I understand my temperamental little oyster beauty, whatever brand my little toaster oven is. And I play around with it. And it doesn't mean it's always right, but I'm also not selling and I'm not mass producing. I make just for myself and what my friends take from me. But what I'll say is consider what he's saying. He is also making, he's a business. So he sells jigs. He's talking about consistency of temperature. He's talking about, just keep in mind what we talked about tonight. He's talking about, and Tesh, if I'm saying this wrong, shout it out in chat. He's talking about consistency of temperature, knowing what the temperature of your toaster oven is. The lower end toaster ovens, you're more likely to get variance and fluctuation in what you're going to get. Chase talks about hitting the jigs individually because he's crazy.
Yeah.
But you get but the concept is the same. So what Chase is saying, or what Ben or Brian, I don't know who's behind on the fly tonight. I hear my dogs, one of the two dogs barking outside. The alarm is going on and off. So if you hear all the back doors, that's just part of the Jig Squad experience, you guys. So
down home experience.
It is what it is. I mean, I like to say we do good discussions around here, but we're not always the classiest of folk. This is just how it goes. Chases. He's the guy with the heat gun and the temp setter. But I do, guys, invest in a temp laser gun and check your temps. I mean, it's an important part. All right, so Chase, listen, I don't want to let this get towards the end here without talking about. So you sell jigs, correct?
Yeah.
All right. So if people want to get a hold of you, how do they get in touch with you about buying your jigs?
Shoot me a message on Final Persuasion Angling on Instagram. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I dabble in some of the custom order stuff, but not as much. I know if some people are looking at the shank body jigs and the cogs are turning about things that you want to do with them, especially if you live not in the Northwest or even in the Northwest. I don't care. And if you want to start making some crazy articulated things that are like massive, hey, we can work something out. You can really make some crazy things. That's why I made these shank body jigs the way that I did, is I made them adaptable. Just because I'm using them in this one way doesn't mean I can't make them in whatever you've thought of, because I've been thinking about it too, and that's why I made them that way. But yeah, send me a message on Instagram and we can talk. But pretty much roughly what I plan on doing each coho season. I haven't done much floating steelhead jigs as much this season, because I need to work on actually getting a mold for some shank bodied steelhead jigs as well. So I've just kind of been mostly putting in time and effort into the twitching jigs and having those available for not just like the fall salmon season, but also anybody going into spring Chinook season that's coming up. So I have some special colors that I've been working on that I should have released last spring when I first started my page. My page is pretty fresh, but should have released them around that time. I talked to some people and didn't come through with some of that because it was still kind of in the works, that I wanted to test out and take a look at and make sure things looked right. But this spring I'll have spring Chinook jigs ready to go, and as always, plenty of fall coho stuff. So if anybody is going to be heading up to Alaska, beginning, maybe in May or June or whenever, some of those guides start to head up to Alaska and you want to put a guide order together, I definitely have the ability to put guide orders together in larger orders, because I have a lot of pre-tied jigs, and that's kind of why you've seen the colors that are on my page. Those are the colors that I was tying a lot of this fall. I kind of had those as my stock colors that I was doing, and I really kind of wasn't willing to budge on doing custom stuff because I just wanted to have jigs out for people. So the people that are like, hey, I need jigs yesterday, I could send out a dozen plus or more and be willing to take some of those orders. So that's kind of what I've been doing. But yeah, just send me a message and take a look and see what I got. And doesn't mean that the colors that I have on there are going to be the colors I only do, because I definitely will be doing some limited edition kind of drops of things. I tend to, there's certain colors that will always stay kind of in the color palette that will always be great for fall Chinook, fall coho, all that. And then there's some colors that might filter in, filter out. No website, just my Instagram page. So
yeah, you know what we got to do, Chase? I think you and I will talk in time, but so guys, listen, here's the thing. Here's what I'll throw on to what Chase is talking about. So Chase designs up in the Pacific Northwest, right? His designs are primarily for the coho world. So that's my version summary of what he just said, right? But understand something. One, there's some colors that he does have that would work definitely for smallmouth. And then the other thing is too, Chase, maybe what we do in time is maybe you and I talk and maybe I come up with a color with you. Yeah. And then we find out. So I'm sure a lot of, I already have things in my head, right? I'm sure there would be people that would be interested, because the way this goes, guys, in order to do custom things, somebody's got to do, the onesie twosies doesn't work when you're a small company doing design work. If you're only doing custom stuff all the time, and it's not a volume. It's got to be a volume thing. So maybe if there's something I can work on with Chase and come up with some color, a color or two of like a limited run.
Yeah,
What do you think,
really
Chase?
cool.
Would you be interested
Yeah,
in
for
something
sure.
like that?
And to kind of explain that process, just to kind of sink that into people's minds a little more, I'll show one last feature. I don't know how much time you have left, but
No, go ahead, bud.
I was
Yeah,
just gonna
show.
say, so these jigs, the collar part of this, all the fluffy marabou and I can't. It's hard to see with all the white. It's a little bright, but all this fluff, that's a brush. I make brushes. That's what I use for the collaring. That's like the other element for that. And if you're unfamiliar with what a brush is, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with brushes, but this is essentially a brush. This is
Oh,
a
look
bunch
at
of
that
material.
beauty.
I wish this. Gosh, the lighting's not. It's just hold on. Let me turn this off real
They,
quick.
you could see it, bud.
Yeah, but the color blending that you can do with brushes, this is material that is spun in wire. It's the concept of a pipe cleaner. If you're not familiar, with the idea of a brush,
That's a good
um,
description.
yeah, because it's material that's spun in wire. It's twisted in wire, and you're able to create blends of things. And so I know that the brushes that I make, these are mostly marabou. And there's some fun leggy, skirty looking stuff that's in there. There's a lot of great flash in there as well. But these jigs I make are based off of those brushes. So if you have a custom color that you want to do, we can do it. I could
But
do
you
it.
got to make
But
brushes for the
you've gotta
style.
I make a brush for that. And so I know that one of these for me makes about a dozen jigs, give or take. And so if you can commit to a dozen of one color, yeah, we can do a dozen, we can do custom colors. But
That makes total
that's
sense,
kind of
bud.
where I'm at personally.
That's cool. I would love to talk to you about coming up with some unique little smallmouth
Yeah.
color, because I mean that's predominantly what I think the guys love it. And Alf, p- uh, let's see, Paladin, it said earlier, Alf, you know what? If you want, buddy, if you remind me, if you shoot me an email, I'll send you my phone number, and I can always text you a couple of pictures so you get an idea what they look like as well. Oh, you could see them. Okay. Um, but if you need to see more, buddy, email me, because I know we've emailed back and forth. I can always connect with you, and I'll give you my phone number, and I can text you some pics as well. Yeah, Brian's saying nice to meet you, man. Brian's a good dude. Brian's
I've seen Brian's stuff. I've poked around. I'm pretty sure I've seen his videos. There's some stuff for 2023 that I want to get into. Um,
nice.
I mean, besides just this, besides just the twitching jigs, there's a lot of cool things I've been looking at you guys. I mean, all of you guys doing with like chatterbait style stuff. That's been
Mhm.
intriguing because I bought my first chatterbait jig a while
Yeah,
back, and because I started seeing videos on the Jig Squad page, and I was like, I mean, that thing, it moves like a plug. I mean, it's
it's
the
crazy.
thing's doing this, the blade's doing this up front, but
It
the kind
hunts.
of, yeah, that is
Yes.
very reminiscent to the a plug made by Yakima Bait Company, the Maglip. And the Maglip
Yes.
is sitting there going like this, and it has the skip beat thing where it'll be
Yep.
tracking, and then it darts off,
Yep.
and it does that. And I've been fascinated with that. So I mean, there's some concepts that I've been wanting to play with a little bit with those. Um, just besides coho, I think it'd work great for coho. But
Yeah, you know it's funny, Chase, because the chatterbaits, like if anyone ever sees anything from the Salt Strong guys, and so a big name down in the Florida scene in the salt world, they put out a lot of production videos of techniques and tying and all. And I shouldn't say tying, of just the mechanics of saltwater fishing and all types of things. If you haven't seen them, Salt Strong, everyone should check it out. Whether it be not tying, it just some really cool stuff. But they talk about all the time about how chatterbaits are phenomenal in saltwater
yeah,
as well. So I know the guys down in Florida, some love it, some some maybe it hasn't hit as much as you could. I just know they work. But they work all over for everything, right? So what a great technique. Well, anything else you want to highlight about some of the jigs? That was good that you talked about the brush, because we didn't talk.
Yeah, and we can, if there's a later date, we could talk more about we can talk for hours about this. We could talk about the
I will
construction
bring
of all
you on
that.
again.
That'd be really cool, because I think there's a lot that can be said even just about the construction of this. There's a lot of great fly designers out there that talk about silhouette and all that stuff. That is, so a lot of it's mind blowing, because you're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Of actually designing things with purpose. But not that that's super related to it, but for 2023, part of it, I want to start cutting zonkers.
Oh yeah,
that's something that I want to do, because I just want to have certain colors on hand. And so if any of you guys, anyone on Instagram, that is cutting zonker and cutting rabbits and stuff, come talk to me, because I would love to hear about what you're doing. And I know most of you guys on there are probably just like, oh, it's super simple. I take a bunch of razor blades, stack them together, and create a little jig, and I drag and draw. I don't want to do that. If you've got something with a machine that does it, because companies like Caroline aren't saying a whole lot about how they're cutting rabbit. I'm pretty sure I cracked their code. I think I know exactly which machine they're using. So Caroline, we're coming for you. No, kidding. But
oh, you wouldn't have said it unless it's true, dude.
Yeah, I mean, there's a machine that I've kind of been wanting to get my paws on, but it's not realistic for a small guy like me.
You see that comment?
I want to get into that. Yeah.
You know where Brian? Yeah. You know where he's at right now?
No.
He's he's one of the head selector managing people for Montana Fly Company.
Okay.
So and used to be at Umpqua.
Okay.
So I would follow through on, and if you need anything,
Brian, let's talk.
Let me know. I'll get you connected with Brian. Chase, absolutely, bud. I would love to have you on. One of the things I want to do is we move later into the year. Like I basically have booked shows up till June, but one of the things I'm going to do is I would like to do like once in a while a Saturday Night Lights, I want to call it, or maybe even some other nights of just little just random lives. So I do think it would be cool to kind of get on and just kind of talk a little bit. And it would be fun. And I can even, the Thursday nights have been so consistent with this 7 o'clock Central time. Mm-hmm. I know it makes it hard for the West Coast crew. So like we can even adjust the time or something and do something cool. I would love to have you on and chat more. But I appreciate you coming on tonight, bud. I think it's cool. You guys, listen, links are below. You can find Chase, or if you need to get in touch with me or Chase, you can connect with me as well, and I will steer you in the right direction. But this has been Jig Squad, and this was the Pacific Northwest edition tonight. And y'all should be listening, because this technique is killer on smallmouth. I actually played around with making some things and using them in the rivers, and I really enjoy it. And I'm kind of excited to get at it a little bit more on the Great Lakes for smallmouth and deeper water. So I'm interested. So you guys, I appreciate you, Chase. Thanks for being on. Stay in chat after I end the show here, buddy, and we'll talk for a few minutes. But you guys, this has been Jig Squad. Chase, thanks for joining us, bud.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it. All right, guys, we're out of here. Peace.